So, hi all, Nadine here. Oh, ah, I'm caught on things. So, I've been having, I've been having some problems. Look at that. Where am I? I've been having some stuff with the recording and the settings just being screwed up and things like that. We'll just move this over. Bother. I don't know. Did I crash? Did I actually stop? It doesn't look like I actually stopped. Whatever. Okay, it says OBS crashed, but it didn't. Of course it didn't. Anyway, um, I managed to do some wonderful stuff today. I managed to get some of my recording difficulties fixed up. So, let's see here. That's my left side. My camera's backwards. Ooh, whatever. Um, whatever. That's okay. Anyway, um, I managed to get some stuff fixed up with the recording and the transitions not being nice. I am so happy just for doing that. Managed to get that figured out today. It's like yay. Um, so I'm just going to now. I'm just gonna tweet out the stuff. Tweet and in the tweet and the doohickey. Let's see here. Where is it? My template. There we go. Um, book club and oh, it's wrong window. Wrong window. Always the wrong window. Mm, yay! Oh my gosh, I can't believe I actually got something fixed up. I'm like so excited. So again, the arthritis is not happy today, as usual. Because why would I want to not have it bad? Uh, but I guess such is life. Um, I did find out. I did get some information on it. Um, and so I did get actually diagnosed with something, at least a range of somethings, and I'm getting sent to a specialist. So, yay for small wins, I guess. That's the word I'm looking for, I guess. Yay for the small wins. Ooh, excuse me. I think I'm gonna have to do another frame for when I'm not using my green screen. But yay for the small wins. I'm happy for that. At least the process is going now. unfortunately in Canada it can take a long time, especially if you're in a place like I'm at, being a small island province. Um, can take a while, and apparently the waiting list is 7 years. Oh my gosh. But what do? At least the process is started. I had thought it was started 3 years ago, but it wasn't. So, nah, what do? Bleh. Can't do much about it now. So I'm just kind of waiting around, see if anybody shows up. And Josiah's here. Hi, honey. I'm not sure who else is watching. I'm not sure if it's just me watching, like if I count as a watching when I have it up on my dashboard. Dashboard, that's the word. Dashboard's the word. Um, but I don't know. Anyway, I'm happy that I managed to get some things fixed. I actually managed to get a lot of things fixed today. Um, the program I was using for coding, um, the global code snippets, where you just kind of it's like a macro thing, but for this program, it wasn't. It was locking up whenever I tried to make the global code snippets file. And I figured out that putting one in the file, just kind of, going into that file, making a file named global code snippets makes it go, hey, you've got one already. Do you want us to overwrite it? And you go, yes, and then it makes it. Yay! It wasn't doing that before. So, and then my transitions for the for for the streaming and for recording and stuff like that, I wanted to do everything in OBS and get it all to run smoothly. Just before going live, I managed to get it to so that the transition, there was no blank spot between the start of the video and the intro video, and then the exit and the outro video. There was always a blank spot and I couldn't figure it out. Well, I figured it out, so I'm going to do a little tutorial on that so that everything can be done in OBS if you're set up for it. Like now I'm set up for everything being done in OBS as long as you're not screwing up. If you're not doing something where you're, like for me with doing the tutorials and stuff, you just kind of go straight through. I'm not doing any editing. I can edit stuff out later if I want to, but I don't have to if I don't screw up now. I don't have to do any kind of editing if I don't want to now. So that is a big bonus all of a sudden. It's a huge time saver, and if you're not doing something where you're going to be, you can do the intro, the outro, the start, and all this kind of stuff, blunk, and the scenes transition nicely, and yay! Woohoo! So, all excited. I'm not excited at all. Yay! And I think I forgot to brush my hair after my shower, but that's okay. It ends up being just fine. And so yeah. So now we've got a couple of books. I don't think anybody's come by, but that's okay. We got a couple of books. The Hour of Man by Robert Barr. The Middle of Toe of the Right Foot by Ambrose Bierce. I was going to say Pierce, but it says Bierce. I just copied it out of the LibriVox, so it must be Bierce unless they've got it mixed up. And 3 and 1 are 1. That sounds kind of weird, but they are horror movies, or suspense books, or horror books, or whatever. Either way, I'm so excited that this is coming up right. Like the transitions is smooth now. I'm so excited. Anyway, I'm gonna start this up. So enjoy your listens, and I'll see you in between.
The Hour and the Man by Robert Barr. This is a LibriVox recording. All of the LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jason Bennett. The Hour and the Man by Robert Barr. Prince Lotarno rose slowly to his feet, casting one malignant glance at the prisoner before him. "You have heard," he said, "what is alleged against you. Have you anything to say in your defense?" The captured brigand laughed. "The time for talk is past," he cried. "This has been a fine farce of a fair trial. You need not have wasted so much time over what you call evidence. I knew my doom when I fell into your hands. I killed your brother. You will kill me. You have proven that I am a murderer and a robber. I could prove the same of you if you were bound hand and foot in my camp as I am bound in your castle. It is useless for me to tell you that I did not know he was your brother, else it would not have happened, for the small robber always respects the larger and more powerful thief. When a wolf is down, the other wolves devour him. I am down, and you will have my head cut off, or my body drawn asunder in your courtyard, whichever pleases your excellency best. It is the fortune of war, and I do not complain. When I say that I am sorry I killed your brother, I merely mean I am sorry you were not the man who stood in his shoes when the shot was fired. You, having more men than I had, have scattered my followers and captured me. You may do with me what you please. My consolation is that killing me will not bring to life the man who is shot. Therefore conclude the farce that has dragged through so many weary hours. Pronounce my sentence. I am ready." There was a moment's silence after the brigand had ceased speaking. Then the prince said, in low tones, but in a voice that made itself heard in every part of the judgment hall, "Your sentence is that on the 15th of January you shall be taken from your cell at 4 o'clock, conducted to the room of execution, and there beheaded." The prince hesitated for a moment as he concluded the sentence, and seemed about to add something more, but apparently he remembered that a report of the trial was to go before the king, whose representative was present, and he was particularly desirous that nothing should go on the records which savored of old-time malignity, for it was well known that his majesty had a particular aversion to the ancient forms of torture that had obtained heretofore in his kingdom. Recollecting this, the prince sat down. The brigand laughed again. His sentence was evidently not so gruesome as he had expected. He was a man who had lived all his life in the mountains, and he had had no means of knowing that more merciful measures had been introduced into the policy of the government. "I will keep the appointment," he said jauntily, "unless I have a more pressing engagement." The brigand was led away to his cell. "I hope," said the prince, "that you noted the defiant attitude of the prisoner." "I have not failed to do so, your excellency," replied the ambassador. "I think," said the prince, "that under the circumstances his treatment has been most merciful." "I am certain, your excellency," said the ambassador, "that his majesty will be of the same opinion. For such a miscreant, beheading is too easy a death." The prince was pleased to know that the opinion of the ambassador coincided so entirely with his own. The brigand Tosa was taken to a cell in the northern tower, where, by climbing on a bench, he could get a view of the profound valley at the mouth of which the castle was situated. He well knew its impregnable position, commanding, as it did, the entrance to the valley. He knew also that if he succeeded in escaping from the castle, he was hemmed in by mountains practically unscalable, while the mouth of the gorge was so well guarded by the castle that it was impossible to get to the outer world through that gateway. Although he knew the mountains well, he realized that, with his band scattered, many killed, and the others fugitives, He would have a better chance of starving to death in the valley than of escaping out of it. He sat on the bench and thought over the situation. Why had the prince been so merciful? He had expected torture, whereas he was to meet the easiest death that a man could die. He felt satisfied there was something in this that he could not understand. Perhaps they intended to starve him to death, now that the appearance of a fair trial was over. Things could be done in the dungeon of a castle that the outside world knew nothing of. His fears of starvation were speedily put to an end by the appearance of his jailer with a better meal than he had had for some time, for during the last week he had wandered a fugitive in the mountains until captured by the prince's men, who evidently had orders to bring him in alive. Why then were they so anxious not to kill him in a fair fight if he were now to be merely beheaded? "What is your name?" asked Tosa of his jailer. "I am called Paolo," was the answer. "Do you know that I am to be beheaded on the 15th of the month?" "I have heard so," answered the man. "And do you attend me until that time?" "I attend you while I am ordered to do so. If you talk much, I may be replaced." "That, then, is a tip for silence, good Paolo," said the brigand. "I always treat well those who serve me well. I regret, therefore, that I have no money with me, and so cannot recompense you for good service." "That is not necessary," answered Paolo. "I receive my recompense from the steward." "Ah, but the recompense of the steward and the recompense of a brigand chief are two very different things. Are there so many pickings in your position that you are rich, Paolo?" "No, I am a poor man." "Well, under certain circumstances I could make you rich." Paolo's eyes glistened, but he made no direct reply. Finally he said in a frightened whisper, "I have tarried too long. I am watched. By and by the vigilance will be relaxed, and then we may perhaps talk of riches." With that the jailer took his departure. The brigand laughed softly to himself. "Evidently," he said, "Paolo is not above the reach of a bribe. We will have further talk on the subject when the watchfulness is relaxed." And so it grew to be a question of which should trust the other. The brigand asserted that hidden in the mountains he had gold and jewels, and these he would give to Paolo if he could contrive his escape from the castle. "Once free of the castle, I can soon make my way out of the valley," said the brigand. "I am not so sure of that," answered Paolo. "The castle is well guarded, have escaped. The alarm bell will be rung, and after that not a mouse can leave the valley without the soldiers knowing it." The brigand pondered on the situation for some time, and at last said, "I know the mountains well." "Yes," said Paolo, "but you are one man, and the soldiers of the prince are many. Perhaps," he added, "if it were made worth my while, I could show you that I know the mountains even better than you do." "What do you mean?" asked the brigand in an excited whisper. "Do you know the tunnel?" inquired Paolo, with an anxious glance towards the door. "What tunnel? I never heard of any." "But it exists, nevertheless. A tunnel through the mountains to the world outside." "A tunnel through the mountains? Nonsense!" cried the brigand. "I should have known of it if one existed. The work would be too great to accomplish." "It was made long before your day, or mine either. If the castle had fallen, then those who were inside could escape through the tunnel. Few knew of the entrance. It is near the waterfall up the valley, and is covered with brushwood. What will you give me to place you at the entrance of that tunnel?" The brigand looked at Paolo sternly for a few moments. Then he answered slowly, "Everything I possess." "And how much is that?" asked Paolo. "It is more than you will ever earn by serving the prince." "Will you tell me where it is before I help you to escape from the castle and lead you to the tunnel?" "Yes," said Tosa. "Will you tell me now?" "No. Bring me a paper tomorrow, and I will draw a plan showing you how to get it." When his jailer appeared, the day after Tosa had given the plan, the brigand asked eagerly, "Did you find the treasure?" "I did," said Paolo quietly. "And will you keep your word? Will you get me out of the castle?" "I will get you out of the castle and lead you to the entrance of the tunnel, but after that you must look to yourself." "Certainly," said Toza. That was the bargain. Once out of this accursed valley, I can defy all the princes in Christendom. Have you a rope?" "We shall need none," said the jailer. "I will come for you at midnight, and take you out of the castle by the secret passage. Then your escape will not be noticed until morning." At midnight his jailer came and led Toza through many a tortuous passage, the two men pausing now and then, holding their breaths anxiously as they came to an open court through which a guard paced. At last they were outside of the castle at 1 hour past midnight. The brigand drew a long breath of relief when he was once again out in the free air. "Where is your tunnel?" he asked, in a somewhat distrustful whisper of his guide. "Hush," was the low answer. "It is only a short distance from the castle, but every inch is guarded, and we cannot go direct. We must make for the other side of the valley, and come to it from the north." "What?" cried Toza in amazement. "Traverse the whole valley for a tunnel a few yards away?" "It is the only safe plan," said Paolo. "If you wish to go by the direct way, I must leave you to your own devices." "I am in your hands," said the brigand with a sigh. "Take me where you will, so long as you lead me to the entrance of the tunnel." They passed down and down around the heights on which the castle stood, and crossed the purling little river by means of stepping stones. Once Toza fell into the water, but was rescued by his guide. There was still no alarm from the castle as daylight began to break. As it grew more light, they both crawled into a cave which had a low opening difficult to find, and there Paolo gave the brigand his breakfast, which he took from a little bag slung by a strap across his shoulder. "What are we going to do for food if we are to be days between here and the tunnel?" asked Toza. "Oh, I have arranged for that, and a quantity of food has been placed where we are most likely to want it. I will get it while you sleep." "But if you are captured, what am I to do?" asked Toza. "Can you not tell me how to find the tunnel, as I told you how to find my treasure?" Paolo pondered over this for a moment, and then said, "Yes, I think it would be the safer way. You must follow the stream until you reach the place where the torrent from the east joins it. Among the hills there is a waterfall, and halfway up the precipice on a shelf of rock there are sticks and bushes. Clear them away, and you will find the entrance to the tunnel. Go through the tunnel until you come to a door which is bolted on this side. When you have passed through, you will see the end of your journey." Shortly after daybreak, the big bell of the castle began to toll, and before noon the soldiers were beating the bushes all around them. They were so close that the two men could hear their voices from their hiding place, where they lay in their wet clothes, breathlessly expecting every moment to be discovered. The conversation of two soldiers who were nearest them nearly caused the hearts of the hiding listeners to stop beating. "Is there not a cave near here?" asked one. "Let us search for it." "Nonsense," said the other. "I tell you that they could not have come this far already." "Why could they not have escaped when the guard changed at midnight?" insisted the first speaker. "Because Paolo was seen crossing the courtyard at midnight, and they could have had no other chance of getting away until just before daybreak." This answer seemed to satisfy his comrade, and the search was given up just as they were about to come upon the fugitives. It was a narrow escape, and, brave as the robber was, he looked pale, while Paolo was in a state of collapse. Many times during the nights and days that followed, the brigand and his guide almost fell into the hands of the minions of the prince. Exposure, privation, semi-starvation, and, worse than all, the alternate wrenchings of hope and fear, began to tell upon the stalwart frame of the brigand. Some days and nights of cold winter rain added to their misery. They dare not seek shelter, for every habitable place was watched. When daylight overtook them on their last night's crawl through the valley, they were within a short distance of the waterfall, whose low roar now came soothingly down to them. "Never mind the daylight," said Toza. "Let us push on and reach the tunnel." "I can go no farther," moaned Paolo. "I am exhausted." "Nonsense," cried Toza. "It is but a short distance." "The distance is greater than you think. Besides, we are in full view of the castle. Would you risk everything now that the game is nearly won? You must not forget that the stake is your head, and remember what day this is." "What day is it?" asked the brigand, turning on his guide. It is the 15th of January, the day on which you were to be executed. Toza caught his breath sharply. Danger and want had made a coward of him, and he shuddered now, which he had not done when he was on his trial and condemned to death. "How do you know it is the 15th?" he asked at last. Paulo held up his stick, notched after the method of Robinson Crusoe. "I am not so strong as you are, and if you will let me rest here until the afternoon, I am willing to make a last effort and try to reach the entrance of the tunnel." "Very well," said Toza shortly. As they lay there that morning, neither could sleep. The noise of the waterfall was music to the ears of them both. Their long toilsome journey was almost over. "What did you do with the gold that you found in the mountains?" asked Toza suddenly. Paulo was taken unawares, and answered, without thinking, "I left it where it was. I will get it after." The brigand said nothing, but that remark condemned Paulo to death. Toza resolved to murder him as soon as they were well out of the tunnel and get the gold himself. They left their hiding place shortly before 12 o'clock, but their progress was so slow, crawling as they had to up the steep side of the mountain, under cover of bushes and trees, that it was well after 3 when they came to the waterfall, which they crossed as best they could on stones and logs. "There," said Toza, shaking himself, "that is our last wetting. Now for the tunnel." The rocky sides of the waterfall hid them from view of the castle, but Paulo called the brigand's attention to the fact that they could be easily seen from the other side of the valley. "It doesn't matter now," said Toza. "Lead the way as quickly as you can to the mouth of the cavern." Paulo scrambled on until he reached a shelf about halfway up the cataract. He threw aside bushes, brambles, and logs, speedily disclosing a hole large enough to admit a man. "You go first," said Paulo, standing aside. "No," answered Toza. "You know the way, and must go first. You cannot think that I wish to harm you. I am completely unarmed." "Nevertheless," said Paulo, "I shall not go first. I did not like the way you looked at me when I told you the gold was still in the hills. I admit I distrust you." "Oh, very well," laughed Toza. "It doesn't really matter." And he crawled into the hole in the rock, Paulo following him. Before long the tunnel enlarged so that a man could stand upright. "Stop," said Paulo. "There is the door near here." "Yes," said the robber. "I remember that you spoke of a door," adding, however, "What is it for, and why is it locked?" "It is bolted on this side," answered Paulo, "and we shall have no difficulty in opening it." "What is it for?" repeated the brigand. "It is to prevent the current of air running through the tunnel and blowing away the obstruction at this end," said the guide. "Here it is," said Toza, as he felt down its edge for the bolt. The bolt drew back easily, and the door opened. The next instant the brigand was pushed rudely into a room, and he heard the bolt thrust back into its place, almost simultaneously with the noise of the closing door. For a moment his eyes were dazzled by the light. He was in an apartment blazing with torches held by a dozen men standing about. In the center of the room was a block covered with black cloth, and beside it stood a masked executioner, resting the corner of a gleaming axe on the black-draped block, with his hands crossed over the end of the axe's handle. The prince stood there surrounded by his ministers. Above his head was a clock, with the minute hand pointed to the hour of 4. "You are just in time," said the prince grimly. "We are waiting for you." End of The Hour and the Man by Robert Barr.
Yay! So sorry about that. I don't know what I did, but apparently, what I'm trying to do is taking up a lot of resources for the computer. But that's okay. I wish it would handle the swap better. It's so much easier. Um, but anyway, what do you do? So we've got the one book, The House of Man. So the middle toe of the right foot by Ambrose Bierce. Ambrose Bierce. Enjoy.
The Middle Toe of the Right Foot by Ambrose Bierce. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jason Bennett. The Middle Toe of the Right Foot by Ambrose Bierce. It is well known that the old Manton house is haunted. In all the rural district near about, and even in the town of Marshall a mile away, not one person of unbiased mind entertains a doubt of it. Incredulity is confined to those opinionated persons who will be called cranks as soon as the useful word shall have penetrated the intellectual domain of the Marshall advance. The evidence that the house is haunted is of two kinds: the testimony of disinterested witnesses who have had ocular proof, and that of the house itself. The former may be disregarded and ruled out on any of the various grounds of objection which may be urged against it by the ingenious, but facts within the observation of all are material and controlling. In the first place, the Manton house has been unoccupied by mortals for more than 10 years, and with its outbuildings is slowly falling into decay, a circumstance which in itself the judicious will hardly venture to ignore. It stands a little way off the loneliest reach of the Marshall and Harriston road, in an opening which was once a farm and is still disfigured with strips of rotting fence, and half covered with brambles overrunning a stony and sterile soil long unacquainted with the plough. The house itself is in tolerably good condition, though badly weather-stained and in dire need of attention from the glazier, the smaller male population of the region having attested in the manner of its kind its disapproval of dwelling without dwellers. It is 2 stories in height, nearly square, its front pierced by a single doorway flanked on each side by a window boarded up to the very top. Corresponding windows above, not protected, serve to admit light and rain to the rooms of the upper floor. Grass and weeds grow pretty rankly all about, and a few shade trees, somewhat the worse for wind, and leaning all in one direction, seem to be making a concerted effort to run away. In short, as the Marshalltown humorist explained in the columns of the Advance, the proposition that the Manton house is badly haunted is the only logical conclusion from the premises. The fact that in this dwelling Mr. Manton thought it expedient one night some 10 years ago to rise and cut the throats of his wife and 2 small children, removing at once to another part of the country, has no doubt done its share in directing public attention to the fitness of the place for supernatural phenomena. To this house, one summer evening, came 4 men in a wagon. 3 of them promptly alighted, and the one who had been driving hitched the team to the only remaining post of what had been a fence. The 4th remained seated in the wagon. "Come," said one of his companions, approaching him, while the others moved away in the direction of the dwelling. "This is the place." The man addressed did not move. "By God," he said harshly, "this is a trick, and it looks to me as if you were in it." "Perhaps I am," the other said, looking him straight in the face and speaking in a tone which had something of contempt in it. "You will remember, however, that the choice of place was, with your own assent, left to the other side. Of course, if you are afraid of spooks—" "I am afraid of nothing," the man interrupted with another oath, and sprang to the ground. The 2 then joined the others at the door, which one of them had already opened with some difficulty, caused by rust of lock and hinge. All entered. Inside it was dark, but the man who had unlocked the door produced a candle and matches and made a light. He then unlocked a door on their right as they stood in the passage. This gave them entrance to a large, square room that the candle but dimly lighted. The floor had a thick carpeting of dust, which partly muffled their footfalls. Cobwebs were in the angles of the walls and depended from the ceiling like strips of rotting lace, making undulatory movements in the disturbed air. The room had 2 windows in adjoining sides, but from neither could anything be seen except the rough inner surfaces of boards a few inches from the glass. There was no fireplace, no furniture. There was nothing besides the cobwebs and the dust. The 4 men were the only objects there which were not a part of the structure. Strange enough they looked in the yellow light of the candle. The one who had so reluctantly alighted was especially spectacular. He might have been called sensational. He was of middle age, heavily built, deep-chested and broad-shouldered. Looking at his figure, one would have said that he had a giant's strength, at his features that he would use it like a giant. He was clean-shaven. his hair rather closely cropped and gray. His low forehead was seamed with wrinkles above the eyes, and over the nose these became vertical. The heavy black brows followed the same law, saved from meeting only by an upward turn at what would otherwise have been the point of contact. Deeply sunken beneath these glowed in the obscure light a pair of eyes of uncertain color, but obviously enough too small. There was something forbidding in their expression, which was not bettered by the cruel mouth and wide jaw. The nose was well enough, as noses go. One does not expect much of noses. All that was sinister in the man's face seemed accentuated by an unnatural pallor. He appeared altogether bloodless. The appearance of the other men was sufficiently commonplace. They were such persons as one meets and forgets that he met. All were younger than the man described, between whom and the eldest of the others, who stood apart, there was apparently no kindly feeling. They avoided looking at each other. "Gentlemen," said the man holding the candle and keys, "I believe everything is right. Are you ready, Mr. Rosser?" The man standing apart from the group bowed and smiled. "And you, Mr. Grossmith?" The heavy man bowed and scowled. "You will be pleased to remove your outer clothing." Their hats, coats, waistcoats, and neckwear were soon removed and thrown outside the door in the passage. The man with the candle now nodded, and the fourth man, he who had urged Grossmith to leave the wagon, produced from the pocket of his overcoat 2 long, murderous-looking bowie knives, which he drew now from their leather scabbards. "They are exactly alike," he said, presenting one to each of the 2 principals, for by this time the dullest observer would have understood the nature of this meeting. It was to be a duel to the death. Each combatant took a knife, examined it critically near the candle, and tested the strength of blade and handle across his lifted knee. Their persons were then searched in turn, each by the second of the other. "If it is agreeable to you, Mr. Grossmith," said the man holding the light, "you will place yourself in that corner." He indicated the angle of the room farthest from the door, whither Grossmith retired, his second parting from him with a grasp of the hand which had nothing of cordiality in it. In the angle nearest the door, Mr. Rosser stationed himself, and after a whispered consultation his second left him, joining the other near the door. At that moment the candle was suddenly extinguished, leaving all in profound darkness. This may have been done by the draught from the open door. Whatever the cause, the effect was startling. "Gentlemen," said a voice which sounded strangely unfamiliar in the altered condition affecting the relations of the senses, "gentlemen, you will not move until you hear the closing of the outer door." A sound of trampling ensued, then the closing of the inner door, and finally the outer one closed with a concussion which shook the entire building. A few minutes afterward, a belated farmer's boy met a light wagon which was being driven furiously toward the town of Marshall. He declared that behind the 2 figures on the front seat stood a third, with its hands upon the bowed shoulders of the others, who appeared to struggle vainly to free themselves from its grasp. This figure, unlike the others, was clad in white, and had undoubtedly boarded the wagon as it passed the haunted house. As the lad could boast a considerable former experience with the supernatural, thereabouts his word had the weight justly due to the testimony of an expert. The story, in connection with the next day's events, eventually appeared in the Advance, with some slight literary embellishments and a concluding intimation that the gentleman referred to would be allowed the use of the paper's columns for their version of the night's adventure. But the privilege remained without a claimant. The events that led up to this duel in the dark were simple enough. One evening 3 young men of the town of Marshall were sitting in a quiet corner of the porch of the village hotel, smoking and discussing such matters as 3 educated young men of a southern village would naturally find interesting. Their names were King, Sancher, and Rosser. At a little distance within easy hearing, but taking no part in the conversation, sat a fourth. He was a stranger to the others. They merely knew that on his arrival by the stagecoach that afternoon he had written in the hotel register the name Robert Grossmith. He had not been observed to speak to anyone except the hotel clerk. He seemed, indeed, singularly fond of his own company, or as the personnel of the Advance expressed it, grossly addicted to evil associations. But then it should be said, in justice to the stranger, that the personnel was himself of a too convivial disposition fairly to judge one differently gifted, and had, moreover, experienced a slight rebuff in an effort at an interview. "I hate any kind of deformity in a woman," said King, "whether natural or acquired. I have a theory that any physical defect has its correlative mental and moral defect." "I infer, then," said Rosser, gravely, "that a lady lacking the moral advantage of a nose would find the struggle to become Mrs. King an arduous enterprise." "Of course you may put it that way," was the reply. "But seriously, I once threw over a most charming girl on learning quite accidentally that she had suffered amputation of a toe. My conduct was brutal if you like, but if I had married that girl I should have been miserable for life and should have made her so." "Whereas," said Sancher, with a light laugh, "by marrying a gentleman of more liberal views she escaped with a parted throat." "Ah, you know to whom I refer. Yes, she married Manton, but I don't know about his liberality. I'm not sure but he cut her throat because he discovered that she lacked that excellent thing in woman, the middle toe of the right foot." "Look at that chap," said Rosser in a low voice, his eyes fixed upon the stranger. That chap was obviously listening intently to the conversation. "Damn his impudence," muttered King. "What ought we to do?" "That's an easy one," Rosser replied, rising. "Sir," he continued, addressing the stranger, "I think it would be better if you would remove your chair to the outer end of the veranda. The presence of gentlemen is evidently an unfamiliar situation to you." The man sprang to his feet and strode forward with clenched hands, his face white with rage. All were now standing. Sancher stepped between the belligerents. "You are hasty and unjust," he said to Rosser. "This gentleman has done nothing to deserve such language." But Rosser would not withdraw a word. By the custom of the country and the time there could be but one outcome to the quarrel. "I demand the satisfaction due to a gentleman," said the stranger, who had become more calm. "I have not an acquaintance in this region. Perhaps you, sir," bowing to Sancher, "will be kind enough to represent me in this matter." Sancher accepted the trust, somewhat reluctantly it must be confessed, for the man's appearance and manner were not at all to his liking. King, who during the colloquy had hardly removed his eyes from the stranger's face and had not spoken a word, consented with a nod to act for Rosser, and the upshot of it was that, the principals having retired, a meeting was arranged for the next evening. The nature of the arrangements has been already disclosed. The duel with knives in a dark room was once a commoner feature of southwestern life than it is likely to be again. How thin a veneering of chivalry covered the essential brutality of the code under which such encounters were possible, we shall see. In the blaze of a midsummer noonday, the old Manton house was hardly true to its traditions. It was of the earth, earthy. The sunshine caressed it warmly and affectionately, with evident disregard of its bad reputation. The grass, greening all the expanse in its front, seemed to grow, not rankly, but with a natural and joyous exuberance, and the weeds blossomed quite like plants. Full of charming lights and shadows, and populous with pleasant-voiced birds, the neglected shade-trees no longer struggled to run away, but bent reverently beneath their burden of sun and song. Even in the glassless upper windows was an expression of peace and contentment due to the light within. Over the stony fields the visible heat danced with a lively tremor incompatible with the gravity which is an attribute of the supernatural. Such was the aspect under which the place presented itself to Sheriff Adams and two other men who had come out from Marshall to look at it. One of these men was Mr. King, the sheriff's deputy. The other, whose name was Brewer, was a brother of the late Mrs. Manton. Under a beneficent law of the state relating to property which had been for a certain period abandoned by an owner whose residence cannot be ascertained, the sheriff was the legal custodian of the Manton farm and appurtenances thereunto belonging. His present visit was in mere perfunctory compliance with some order of a court, in which Mr. Brewer had an action to get possession of the property as heir to his deceased sister. By a mere coincidence, the visit was made on the day after the night that Deputy King had unlocked the house for another and very different purpose. His presence now was not of his own choosing. He had been ordered to accompany his superior, and at the moment could think of nothing more prudent than simulated alacrity in obedience to the command. Carelessly opening the front door, which to his surprise was not locked, The sheriff was amazed to see, lying on the floor of the passage into which it opened, a confused heap of men's apparel. Examination showed it to consist of 2 hats, and the same number of coats, waistcoats, and scarves, all in a remarkably good state of preservation, albeit somewhat defiled by the dust in which they lay. Mr. Brewer was equally astonished, but Mr. King's emotion is not on record. With a new and lively interest in his own actions, the sheriff now unlatched and pushed open the door on the right, and the 3 entered. The room was apparently vacant. No, as their eyes became accustomed to the dimmer light, something was visible in the farthest angle of the wall. It was a human figure, that of a man crouching close in the corner. Something in the attitude made the intruders halt when they had barely passed the threshold. The figure more and more clearly defined itself. The man was upon one knee, his back in the angle of the wall, his shoulders elevated to the level of his ears, his hands before his face, palms outward, the fingers spread and crooked like claws. The white face turned upward on the retracted neck had an expression of unutterable fright, the mouth half open, the eyes incredibly expanded. He was stone dead. Yet, with the exception of a bowie knife, which had evidently fallen from his own hand, not another object was in the room. In thick dust that covered the floor were some confused footprints near the door and along the wall through which it opened. Along one of the adjoining walls, too, past the boarded-up windows, was the trail made by the man himself in reaching his corner. Instinctively, in approaching the body, the 3 men followed that trail. The sheriff grasped one of the outthrown arms. It was as rigid as iron, and the application of a gentle force rocked the entire body without altering the relation of its parts. Brewer, pale with excitement, gazed intently into the distorted face. "God of mercy!" he suddenly cried. "It is Manton." "You are right," said King, with an evident attempt at calmness. "I knew Manton. He then wore a full beard and his hair long, but this is he." He might have added, "I recognized him when he challenged Rosser. I told Rosser and Sancher who he was before we played him this horrible trick. When Rosser left this dark room at our heels, forgetting his outer clothing in the excitement, and driving away with us in his shirt sleeves, all through the discreditable proceedings we knew whom we were dealing with, murderer and coward that he was." But nothing of this did Mr. King say. With his better light he was trying to penetrate the mystery of the man's death. That he had not once moved from the corner where he had been stationed, that his posture was that of neither attack nor defense, that he had dropped his weapon, that he had obviously perished of sheer horror of something that he saw, these were circumstances which Mr. King's disturbed intelligence could not rightly comprehend. Groping in intellectual darkness for a clue to his maze of doubt, his gaze, directed mechanically downward in the way of one who ponders momentous matters, fell upon something which there, in the light of day, and in the presence of living companions, affected him with terror. In the dust of years that lay thick upon the floor, leading from the door by which they had entered, straight across the room to within a yard of Manton's crouching corpse, were 3 parallel lines of footprints, light but definite impressions of bare feet, the outer ones those of small children, the inner a woman's. From the point at which they ended they did not return. They pointed all one way. Brewer, who had observed them at the same moment, was leaning forward in an attitude of rapt attention, horribly pale. "Look at that!" he cried, pointing with both hands at the nearest print of the woman's right foot, where she had apparently stopped and stood. "The middle toe is missing. It was Gertrude." Gertrude was the late Mrs. Manton, sister of Mr. Brewer. End of The Middle Toe of the Right Foot by Ambrose Bierce.
Wow. Killing a girl because they didn't have their middle toe of the right foot. That's always interesting. um, let's see here. Excuse me. Stuff that makes you tired. Number 1, 5, 10, 12, 14, 20, 25, 96, 87. Yay! Um, Hope you guys are enjoying it. The last one is 3 and 1 are 1. Ambrose Bryce. He's got some weird stories.
3 and 1 are 1 by Ambrose Bierce. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Tanya. 3 and 1 are 1 by Ambrose Bierce. In the year 1861, Barr, a young man of 22, lived with his parents and an elder sister near Carthage, Tennessee. The family were in somewhat humble circumstances, subsisting by cultivation of a small and not very fertile plantation. Owning no slaves, they were not rated among the best people of their neighborhood, but they were honest persons of good education, fairly well-mannered, and as respectable as any family could be if uncredentialed by personal dominion over the sons and daughters of Ham. The elder Lassiter had that severity of manner that so frequently affirms an uncompromising devotion to duty and conceals a warm and affectionate disposition. He was of the iron of which martyrs are made, but in the heart of the matrix had lurked a nobler metal, fusible at a milder heat, yet never coloring nor softening the hard exterior. By both heredity and environment, something of the man's inflexible character had touched the other members of the family. The Lassiter home, though not devoid of domestic affection, was a veritable citadel of duty, and duty, ah, duty, is as cruel as death. When the war came on, it found in the family, as in so many others in that state, a divided sentiment. The young man was loyal to the Union, the others savagely hostile. This unhappy division begot an insupportable domestic bitterness, and when the offending son and brother left home with the avowed purpose of joining the Federal army, not a hand was laid in his, not a word of farewell was spoken, not a good wish followed him out into the world, whither he went to meet with such spirit as he might, whatever fate awaited him. Making his way to Nashville, already occupied by the army of General Buell, he enlisted in the first organization that he found, a Kentucky regiment of cavalry, and in due time passed through all the stages of military evolution, from raw recruit to experienced trooper. A right good trooper he was, too, although in his oral narrative from which this tale is made there was no mention of that. The fact was learned from his surviving comrades, for Barr Lassiter has answered here to the sergeant whose name is Death. 2 years after he had joined it, his regiment passed through the region whence he had come. The country thereabout had suffered severely from the ravages of war, having been occupied alternately and simultaneously by the belligerent forces, and a sanguinary struggle had occurred in the immediate vicinity of the Lassiter homestead, but of this the young trooper was not aware. Finding himself in camp near his home, he felt a natural longing to see his parents and sister, hoping that in them, as in him, the unnatural animosities of the period had been softened by time and separation. Obtaining a leave of absence, he set foot in the late summer afternoon, and soon after the rising of the full moon was walking up the gravel path leading to the dwelling in which he had been born. Soldiers in war age rapidly, and in youth 2 years are a long time. Barr Lassiter felt himself an old man and had almost expected to find the place a ruin and a desolation. Nothing, apparently, was changed. At the sight of each dear and familiar object he was profoundly affected. His heart beat audibly, his emotion nearly suffocated him, an ache was in his throat. Unconsciously he quickened his pace until he almost ran, his long shadow making grotesque efforts to keep its place beside him. The house was unlighted, the door open. As he approached and paused to recover control of himself, his father came out and stood bareheaded in the moonlight. "Father!" cried the young man, springing forward with outstretched hand. "Father!" The elder man looked him sternly in the face, stood a moment motionless, and without a word withdrew into the house. Bitterly disappointed, humiliated, inexpressibly hurt, and altogether unnerved, the soldier dropped upon a rustic seat in deep dejection. supporting his head upon his trembling hand. But he would not have it so. He was too good a soldier to accept repulse as defeat. He rose and entered the house, passing directly to the sitting-room. It was dimly lighted by an uncurtained east window. On a low stool by the hearth-side, the only article of furniture in the place, sat his mother, staring into a fireplace strewn with blackened embers and cold ashes. He spoke to her, tenderly, interrogatively, and with hesitation, but she neither answered, nor moved, nor seemed in any way surprised. True, there had been time for her husband to apprise her of their guilty son's return. He moved nearer and was about to lay his hand upon her arm when his sister entered from an adjoining room, looked him full in the face, passed him without a sign of recognition, and left the room by a door that was partly behind him. He had turned his head to watch her, but when she was gone his eyes again sought his mother. She, too, had left the place. Barr strode to the door by which he had entered. The moonlight on the lawn was tremulous, as if the sward were a rippling sea. The trees in their black shadows shook as in a breeze. Blended with its borders, the gravel walk seemed unsteady and insecure to step on. This young soldier knew the optical illusions produced by tears. He felt them on his cheek, and saw them sparkle on the breast of his trooper's jacket. He left the house and made his way back to camp. The next day, with no very definite intention, with no dominant feeling that he could rightly have named, he again sought the spot. Within a half-mile of it he met Bushrod Ambrose, a former playfellow and a schoolmate, who greeted him warmly. "I'm going to visit my home," said the soldier. The other looked at him rather sharply, but said nothing. "I know," continued Lassiter, "that my folks have not changed, but—" "There have been changes," Ambrose interrupted. "Everything changes. I'll go with you, if you don't mind. We can talk as we go." But Ambrose did not talk. Instead of a house they found only fire-blackened foundations of stone enclosing an area of compact ashes pitted by rains. Lassiter's astonishment was extreme. "I could not find the right way to tell you," said Ambrose. "In the fight a year ago your house was burned by a Federal shell." "And my family? Where are they?" "In heaven, I hope. All were killed by the shell." End of 3 and 1 are One by Ambrose Bierce. Recording by Tanya, March 25th, 2011.
There we go. That was interesting. Um, Hope you guys enjoyed it. I think I might do a stream on my personal channel later just to kind of BS with everybody if I can figure out the memory usage, how to get that down while I'm working. Um, Thanks for joining me. I appreciate it. And as usual, I hope you have an absolutely wonderful day. Bye.